Hello there, coming to you from the bunker. This is episode 48 of JW Watch, the show that keeps a close eye on all things JW, offering Jehovah's Witnesses a more objective viewpoint on current developments that the governing body almost certainly doesn't want them to hear. On February 24th, 2022, Russia began a special military operation, or in real terms, an invasion of neighbouring Ukraine, drawing overwhelming condemnation from the international community. In the days since, we've seen intense fighting and bloodshed throughout the country, including in densely populated areas, with civilian infrastructure seemingly targeted by Russian forces. In the first 10 days of fighting, a reported 364 Ukrainians have died and at least 759 have been injured. As a result of the violence, the UN estimates over 1.5 million have fled the besieged nation. Most of this won't be new information to many of you watching this video. We all have access to the news media and can witness this horrifying crisis unfolding before us in real time. So the question this episode will be answering is this: how is the Jehovah's Witness religion responding to the war in Ukraine? After all, in recent years, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses has singled out Russia as being the king of the north spoken of in the Bible book of Daniel. They've also pointed to the coronavirus pandemic as evidence that we are in the last days of the last days before Armageddon. So when the first Russian tanks crossed over onto Ukrainian soil, many commentators and former members like myself were fascinated to see what spin the religion would put on this new conflict. As of now, early March, there have been two notable responses to the Ukraine conflict. One in the form of a governing body update video uploaded on March 4th, the other in this article on the jw.org website titled Russia Invades Ukraine. The article reads as follows. In the early morning hours of February 24th, 2022, Russia began a military invasion of Ukraine, despite the efforts of world leaders to avoid war. How might this military conflict affect the world? The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said a few days ago, "The price in human suffering, destruction, and damage to European and global security is too high to contemplate." Two things are interesting about this opening paragraph, which seems to have been carefully worded to present a balanced, non-sensationalist angle to lead the reader in before all the crazy stuff starts. Firstly, it's acknowledged that world leaders were trying to avoid war. How does this square with the Jehovah's Witness narrative that worldly governments under satanic influence are making life in these last days intolerable to the point where God must intervene at Armageddon? Secondly, you will notice that Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, is quoted as an authority, which is ironic given what is said about the United Nations in literally the very latest May 2022 study edition of the Watchtower magazine, which says on page 10, "Next we see another wild beast. This one looks almost the same as the seven-headed wild beast, with the exception that it is scarlet-coloured. It is called the image of the wild beast and is described as an eighth king. This king is spoken of as coming into existence, then going out of existence, and later reappearing. How well this description fits the United Nations organization, which promotes the interests of the worldwide political system. It existed first as the League of Nations, then it went out of existence during World War II. It later emerged again in its present-day form. By means of their propaganda, the political beasts stir up opposition to Jehovah and his people. Symbolically, they gather the kings of the entire inhabited earth together to the war of Armageddon, which is the great day of God the Almighty. But we will have nothing to fear. Our great God Jehovah will react swiftly to save all those who support his rulership. So when it suits Jehovah's Witnesses to present themselves as rational and relevant, the United Nations is a source of balanced commentary on world developments. But through the other side of their mouths, the governing body insists the UN is the image of the wild beast and stirring up opposition to Jehovah and his people. Anyway, let's move on. In the JW.org Ukraine article, we see there a subheading, "What significance do events like this have according to the Bible?" And then we have 4 bullet points, the first of which reads, "Jesus Christ foretold a time when nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom." Read the article, "What is the sign of the last days or end times?" to see how the Bible shows that wars today fulfill Jesus' prophecy. Already, just a few sentences into the article, we're seeing sensationalist doomsday rhetoric about the last days and end times. Jehovah's Witnesses have long taught that the last days began in 1914 and will culminate imminently in Armageddon. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear for a previous video explaining why 1914 is not a date of apocalyptic significance, as Jehovah's Witnesses suggest. But even if we accept the argumentation presented at face value, how can humans fighting each other be reasonably considered an omen for the global status quo to suddenly shift? From road rage to civil wars, from gang violence to Hiroshima, for as long as there have been humans, humans have been at the throats of other humans. Heralding something that's always been happening as a harbinger of the apocalypse is hardly persuasive. If humans were to suddenly stop fighting each other all around the world for, say, a year, that would be an impressive sign if predicted in advance, and a cause to sit up and take notice. But if we're honest with ourselves, armed conflict in the 21st century is no more a portent of divine judgment than armed conflict in the 20th, 19th, 18th centuries, and so on. Let's move on. Second bullet point. The Bible book of Revelation depicts warfare as a rider who is seated on a fiery-coloured horse and who takes peace away from the earth. Read the article, "The Four Horsemen, Who Are They?" to find out how this prophecy applies to warfare today. Frankly, Jehovah's Witnesses have long lost any credibility when it comes to interpreting for us the Bible book of Revelation. We're talking about a group that used the pages of its 1988 book, Revelation, Its Grand Climax at Hand, to make the following fanciful, self-indulgent claims. Regarding Revelation chapters 8 and 9, the 7 angelic trumpet blasts were said to symbolize resolutions read out at early Jehovah's Witness conventions between 1922 and 1928. Regarding Revelation chapter 9, The locusts, resembling horses with men's faces, were said to depict Jehovah's Witnesses. Also regarding Revelation chapter 9, the cavalry riding horses with lions' heads and the tails of snakes was said to depict Jehovah's Witnesses. Regarding Revelation chapter 11, the death and resurrection of the two witnesses was said to describe the imprisonment of Watchtower officials between 1918 and 1919. Revelation chapter 16, the pouring out of the first 5 bowls of God's anger, was said to predict statements published in Jehovah's Witness literature in the 20th century. So yes, given what Jehovah's Witnesses have said in the past regarding Revelation and its interpretation, I think we can take any of their current ramblings about Revelation and the fiery-coloured horse with a huge dollop of salt. Moving on to the third bullet point, the book of Daniel foretold a rivalry between the king of the north and the king of the south. Watch the video Fulfilled Prophecy, Daniel chapter 11, to learn why Russia and its allies can be identified as the king of the north. I've already answered this bizarre claim about Russia being the king of the north in multiple videos on this channel, including this one, Jehovah's Witnesses convinced Russia is the king of the north. Thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious. Suffice it to say, it's important to keep two things in mind. Firstly, the book of Daniel is widely considered by Bible scholars to be a forgery. In other words, rather than being literally written by a prophet named Daniel, exiled in Babylon, the book was written centuries later, as evidenced by the many mistakes the unknown authors made when describing Neo-Babylonian history. If you want more information about this, there will be a link to an excellent article by Dr. Richard Carrier titled How We Know Daniel is a Forgery in the description below. Secondly, the prophecy of the king of the north and the king of the south says nothing about the events of the 20th century. When examined by scholars, it's very clearly describing the Ptolemaic and Seleucid wars of the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. In fact, one reason we know that Daniel was written around 164 BCE is because the accuracy and detail of the events described in the prophecy increases when describing that particular point in history, whereas descriptions of earlier events are briefer and less specific. And when the prophecy takes a stab at what will end up happening in the future to Antiochus' 4th Epiphanes, the writers get it wrong entirely. So, with all that said, let's take a look at the 4th and final bullet point. Revelation also describes the war of the great day of God the Almighty. However, this is not a war between nations, such as we now observe. Read the article, What is the Battle of Armageddon, to find more information about that future event. Yes, rather than being a war between nations, Armageddon, as understood by Jehovah's Witnesses, will be the annihilation of everyone on the planet who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. In other words, it will be a global slaughter on a scale never before seen in history, many, many times worse than the horrifying events now unfolding in Ukraine, which in a sadistic irony are being exploited by the writers of this propaganda piece as a recruitment opportunity. Anyway, let's skip to the final paragraph of the article on jw.org. There are more than 129,000 of Jehovah's Witnesses living in Ukraine. Like the witnesses in every other country, they imitate Jesus by remaining politically neutral and refusing to take part in war. Worldwide, Jehovah's Witnesses continue to declare the good news of the kingdom as the solution to mankind's problems, including war. We invite you to contact us to learn more about the Bible's message of hope. Well, I'm not sure that the future massacre of all non-Jehovah's Witnesses can really be described as good news or a solution to anything, much less the military conflicts we're seeing now in the Ukraine and elsewhere, which are infinitesimal in magnitude compared to the future worldwide bloodbath the JW leadership apparently craves. But anyway, that was the JW.org article, and straight away we can see a distinct doomsday spin being put on the Ukraine conflict, coupled with mad ramblings about Bible prophecy and the King of the North. We see more of the latter in the video just recently put out by Jehovah's Witnesses, in which governing body member Mark Sanderson says the following.
Welcome. We have many updates to share. Of course, the world's attention has been fixed on events in Russia and Ukraine. As Jehovah's people, we are not surprised by such events. We're well aware that Russia and its allies fill the role described in Daniel chapter 11 as the King of the North. When the governing body first made this identification at the annual meeting in 2018, we mentioned that the King of the North had already taken possession of Crimea. When reading Daniel chapter 11, it's not surprising to see that the King of the North is interested in other territories. Certainly, this is the time to keep on the watch continually and to maintain our Christian neutrality. As of February 28, we have no deaths, but one reported injury among our brothers in Ukraine. Dozens of their homes have been damaged. Thousands of our brothers have fled areas of military conflict. We're keeping you, dear brothers and sisters, in Ukraine and Russia in our prayers. At the same time, we're doing everything possible to be sure that you'll have the needed spiritual food as well as the necessities of life.
And that's it. In a 22-minute video, that's pretty much all Mark Sanderson has to say specifically on the war in Ukraine. Now, for me, two things are interesting here. Firstly, Mark Sanderson appears to be playing it safe. It seems lessons may have been learned from the clumsy, ill-considered, overexcited responses from the likes of Tony Morris and Stephen Lett in the early days of the pandemic.
What we're experiencing right now in this global pandemic, I was telling the branch class yesterday, it doesn't bother me. We've been waiting for this. We knew things like this were going to happen. Christ Jesus has prepared us. Where's the shock?
So the events unfolding around us are making clearer than ever that we're living in the final part of the last days, undoubtedly the final part of the final part of the last days, shortly before the last day of the last days.
I can just imagine Stephen Lett volunteering to give his reaction to the Ukraine conflict, and Mark Sanderson saying something like, "Sit down, Stephen." If you don't mind, I think I'd prefer to handle this one, and I'll be doing so less embarrassingly. Secondly, you'll notice that everything said about the war in Ukraine is entirely JW-centric. No expressions are made regarding the death and suffering of non-Jehovah's Witnesses. There's no call to action to give practical help to everyone affected by the conflict, regardless of their beliefs. When disaster strikes, apparently all Jehovah's Witnesses should really be bothered about is the plight of other Jehovah's Witnesses. And this is exactly what we're seeing when we take a look at Jehovah's Witness Instagram posts. I have a few selected for you here. Here's one that says, brothers and sisters from Poland are waiting for their spiritual family from Ukraine. Another one, quite a long one, on Tuesday evening, a train arrived from Kyiv with about 20 brothers who came with their pets. The brothers from Kyiv fled the bombed city full of troops. Some spent several days in the basement. They tell how hotly they prayed. They say that Jehovah listened to them because they reached Poland safely. They did not sleep in the train because they travelled standing. They showed us a phone with lots of bombing messages. They thank God very much that some of our male brothers were allowed to enter Poland. Another one here. We are ready to assist our loved Ukrainian brothers and sisters at the Ukraine-Slovakia border. A Croatian news feed shows images of a JW booth and witnesses awaiting brothers and sisters at Ukraine border. I must confess I missed that particular Croatian news feed on our telly. And picture from brother in Moldova waiting for our Ukrainian friends at the border. Waiting for our brothers and sisters from Ukraine at the border. So all focused entirely on meeting brothers and sisters, on giving aid to fellow believers. Now, at this point, I should probably mention that last week, my team and I travelled to the Ukraine border with Hungary to try to assist refugees fleeing the violence. We will be releasing a special short documentary about our trip in the coming days. But when we were there, we noticed Jehovah's Witnesses standing near the relief centre, and here is a clip of yours truly asking them a few questions. Does anyone speak English? No? No English?
I think they
Speak Ukrainian? We're filmmakers, we're just documenting what's happening and we're wondering what organisation they're representing.
Ми робимо зараз відео. Вас можна знімати на відео? Я magyarul beszélek. Magyarul beszélek. Kamerázhatunk? Megengedik?
Megengedünk, hogy kamerázunk, de interjúban. Az interjútól tekintsük el.
We can make cameras, but they're not ready to take an interview.
They don't want to do an interview. So it's just strange because JW.org is Jehovah's Witnesses, so I'm just interested to know whether they're here to help everybody or is it just Jehovah's Witnesses?
Azt megkérdezhetjük, hogy azért jöttek ide, hogy mindenkinek segítsenek, ugye?
Persze segítünk munkatársainkon, valamint a hittásainkon.
They're helping everybody, but as well for their people. I don't know how to call it exactly.
They're here to help everybody and not just Jehovah's Witnesses.
Not just, but of course they're...
Okay, that's good. So even people from different, like the Catholic Church and everybody?
Yeah.
Just ask them, the Catholic Church and everybody.
Akár a katolikus
Azzal a célral, ez már olyan nem, mint egy gyógyszerű. Itt jönnek testvéreink, és igazítjuk őket, és kilássák terem, kapnak szállást.
People are coming here and they are helping them, they are providing accommodation for them.
Would they provide accommodation for Catholics as well as Jehovah's Witnesses?
When I asked, he told me that it's like an interview game.
Oh, so he doesn't want to answer that question. Okay. Well, thank you. So that was my own somewhat awkward encounter with Jehovah's Witnesses responding to the humanitarian crisis. Now, to be clear, I don't hold any resentment towards these individuals, including those I showed you on Instagram. I actually really admire them going out of their way to help people in need, even if, despite their claims, in the case of the people I met, it's only people who share their beliefs who can realistically expect to receive this help. Anyone who helps anyone in a crisis of this kind deserves praise and commendation. But in the context of the Bible and Christianity, how does extending charity only to fellow believers make any professed Christian denomination unique. It was Jesus himself who purportedly said at Matthew 5:46 and 47, "For if you love those loving you, what reward do you have? Are not also the tax collectors doing the same thing? And if you greet your brothers only, what extraordinary thing are you doing? Are not also the people of the nations doing the same thing?" And you could argue the entire message of Christ's story of the Good Samaritan was that you should help someone in need regardless of their faith, since the man in the parable was passed by members of his own religion before finally receiving assistance from a Samaritan, someone he would have perceived as an apostate. Despite this glaring contradiction, I fully expect more propaganda material in the coming weeks and months in which the Jehovah's Witness leadership will emphasize their efforts in extending aid. But let's not be fooled by any of this. Jehovah's Witness aid and relief efforts are for Jehovah's Witnesses only, and outsiders will only occasionally benefit in practical terms as a rare exception. Anyway, now that we've heard and discussed the Jehovah's Witness angle on the war in Ukraine, I thought it would be good to include the perspective of a Ukrainian former Jehovah's Witness who sent in this video to JWWatch.
Приветствую зрителей канала Ллойда Эванса. Меня зовут Павел, я из центра Украины, из города Черкассы. Я автор канала «Вера и разум», посвященного разоблачению культа свидетелей Иеговы. Я не был свидетелем Иеговы, но большую часть жизни прожил в семье свидетелей Иеговы. Я начал свою деятельность против общества Сторожевой башни после того, как наша семья была разделена практикой лишения общения бывших членов этой организации. Мой брат и мама приняли решение выйти из свидетелей, в то время как сестра с мужем по-прежнему находятся внутри этой организации. Военную ситуацию в Украине по состоянию на утро 4 марта вы можете увидеть на этой карте. Черкассы находятся вот здесь. Как видите, не считая западной части Украины, это чуть ли не единственная часть страны, где сейчас нет боевых действий. Поэтому я и могу снимать для вас это видео, а не сидеть где-то в бункере с женой и двумя своими детьми, которым 8 и 9 лет. Кстати говоря, моей дочке 8 лет исполнилось позавчера. Ни гостей, ни веселья, ни праздничного настроения. Конечно, сейчас нам не до дней рождения, идет война. Умирают тысячи людей, как со стороны захватнических войск Российской Федерации, которая абсолютно вероломно напала на независимое европейское государство, так и со стороны вооруженных сил Украины и ее мирных жителей. Несмотря на открытую войну на территории Украины, НАТО отказывается закрыть небо Украины от полетов, а это значит, что оккупационные войска Путина продолжат нападать на украинские города, убивать и захватывать их мирное население в плен, уничтожать инфраструктуру страны. Тысячи людей уже остались без тепла, еды, электричества, жизненно важных медикаментов. Возможно, скоро таких людей в Украине будет миллионы. Уважаемые зрители канала Ллойда Эванса, я призываю вас, независимо от вашего вероисповедания, национальности, политических взглядов, помочь жителям Украины и их детям выжить в это сложное время. Вы можете сделать пожертвование через официальные банковские счета организации ЮНИСЕФ. Также вы можете отправить любое пожертвование на реквизиты Министерства обороны Украины. Украине сейчас нужна любая помощь. Мирные граждане и дети не должны страдать от этой абсолютно неоправданной агрессии сумасшедшего из Кремля. Он воюет сейчас с мирной страной. Он воюет сейчас не против выдуманных нацистов в украинском правительстве, а против украинского народа. Против мужчин, женщин и детей. Он плюет на все европейские и общечеловеческие ценности. Он плюет на Европу. Он плюет на нас всех. Если Путина не остановить в Украине, он пойдет дальше в Европу. К сожалению, и Европа, и США до сих пор пытаются с ним о чем-то договориться и повлиять на него цивилизованными способами. Уверен, они не подействуют. Диктатор поймет только язык силы. Вы, зрители этого канала, вряд ли можете остановить президента Путина, но вы можете уменьшить страдания нашего народа. Помогите нам. Я желаю всем мира.
So that was Pavel's message from Ukraine. And you will have noticed Pavel referring there to UNICEF and putting a call out there for donations to help those suffering in Ukraine, including those trying to flee. At this point, I should mention that this episode of JW Watch is part of a fundraiser for UNICEF. So if you click on the donate button that appears near this video, 100% of your donations will go straight to UNICEF and help its efforts in Ukraine. Alternatively, Pavel has provided account details for other organizations in Ukraine that are doing their best to provide aid and relief to all. So feel free to use those details instead if you prefer. But having been moved by Pavel's video, I wanted to reach out to him directly. So earlier today, he and I had the following brief conversation. So Pavel, thank you so much for joining me. Obviously, I was really moved by the video message that you sent through. Thank you so much for taking the time to put that together. I'm sure it's a very stressful time for you and your family at the moment.
Yes, of course, and thank you, Lloyd.
One of the things that I was really noticing in your message was that you had some very strong words, obviously, for Russia, and you know the way the international community could be doing more to help people in Ukraine. When I look at what the governing body are saying and their calls for Christian neutrality, they're telling Jehovah's Witnesses essentially to not speak any opinion on what's happening politically, not speak any opinion on whether even the invasion of their country by Russia is a good thing or a bad thing. Do you think it will be difficult for Jehovah's Witnesses in Ukraine to keep a strictly neutral stance when their homes are being bombed?
What I see now, that Jehovah's Witnesses are not fully neutral. They say they are neutral, but my sister, she is now in Poland. The husband is elder. He sent you there to Poland, and she told me yesterday that their brothers, which she talked to, some brothers from Jehovah's Witnesses are supporting in word. They speak to my sister and they say that Putin, not the good person, but he was forced to do what he do now. But some of the Jehovah's Witnesses, like my neighbor, he lived in my town, he told that it would be better if Putin died. You see? You understand? When the bombs are coming, Jehovah's Witnesses also feeling what all people feel. They don't. They wouldn't go to the meetings with
signs.
With signs.
With flags.
With flags. We don't want war. We for the peace. But inside they feeling.
I think what you're describing will be evident on a larger scale, not just in Ukraine but around the world. There will be Jehovah's Witnesses who are being asked to remain neutral, to keep their Christian neutrality. But when you have a very clear example of an aggressor nation with authoritarian tactics besieging a sovereign state, how do you not hold an opinion on something like that? And just being ordered not to have an opinion doesn't mean that you just stop thinking about it. It's a bit like thought crime, isn't it? Of course you're going to have opinions. All they're doing essentially is telling Jehovah's Witnesses to shut up about them. I did just want to as well ask about the situation where you are now. You expressed that you're relatively safe and the fighting hasn't reached you yet. Are you worried at all? Are you anxious about potentially having to flee with your family?
I'm from Cherkasy. It's the center of Ukraine, the geographical center of Ukraine. We have even a monument near Cherkasy, the heart of Ukraine. Here is most safely here, and because there are no any military bases or structures, so the fights, no fights here. But we are fully ready to go to the Europe if the front of the fights are going here. My family, my wife, and two of my child are fully assembled. My car is
all fueled up.
Filled up, yeah.
Yeah.
Even canister I filled up. And all things take with us already near the door. All our things. But now, no bombs, no rockets, just one rocket near the town fell near the town. So we are waiting. I speak, I wrote messages on YouTube, Facebook. This is how I can help. When I will take out my family from there to Europe, maybe I'll take the weapon and go to kill Russians. I don't want.
You're ready to defend your country.
I must.
Wow. Well, it's an impossible situation to be in, and I hope you understand that if you do need help fleeing, I'm here ready to assist you. I'm only a couple of borders away here in Croatia. We recently, a few days ago, went to the Hungarian border, as you know, to collect refugees, and we found some Jehovah's Witnesses there with a jw.org sign. Obviously, they were only interested in helping Jehovah's Witnesses. Although they didn't say that, it was clear to me that they were there to assist people depending on their beliefs. Do you think that in a crisis such as this, it should really matter what people believe, or do you think everybody should be deserving of help?
It's hard to say. Somebody dies now, and I think that they in the first order, people must help them. But of course, I am sorry for all, and they all humans. So we must help everybody.
I absolutely agree. Well, Pavel, you are an inspiration. I know we'll be keeping in touch. And again, my offer stands. If you ever need help from me and my team in getting out, you know we stand ready. And thank you again for sending in your video. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Lloyd. And thank you all the people that helping us. Slava Ukraini!
Obviously, I'll be keeping close tabs on Pavel, and I really hope he and his family are able to stay safe. It's been very moving to see his incredible resilience in the face of adversity, and particularly his readiness to express himself freely and openly regarding his political views, something believing Jehovah's Witnesses in Ukraine and elsewhere do not have the luxury of doing. Anyway, that brings to an end this episode of JW Watch. Fans of the show will note that we no longer have the panel format. For reasons I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, we're unlikely to return to it in the foreseeable future, but I hope the information I've provided has been helpful regardless. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos, and as always, thank you for watching. Slava Ukraini!